Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy immersive stories and emotional journeys, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters, and feel free to explore the other videos waiting for you. If this world draws you in, share it with someone who might love it too. The highway stretched behind them like an exhausted ribbon, fading into the kind of hazy afternoon light that always made the world look softer than it truly was. Lena kept her hands steady on the steering wheel, though her knuckles were white, and the tension in her shoulders felt like a knot carved out of stone. The car hummed beneath them, carrying her and her 7-year-old daughter, Kira, deeper into the unfamiliar quiet of the countryside. It had been hours since they left the city, hours since Lena had last felt sure of anything at all. Still, she drove forward because turning back wasn't an option. She had promised herself she would start over, and she had promised her daughter a better life than the one they had narrowly held together. Kira sat in the back seat, legs drawn up, her face pressed against the window. She watched the passing fields and distant trees with the kind of curiosity Lena sometimes envied. Children didn't worry about making rent or finding work or trying to remember the last time they had a good night's sleep. They didn't replay in their minds the arguments that had gone too far or wonder whether the choices they'd made were the wrong ones. Children simply looked out the window and asked, "Are we almost there?" Even when the answer had already been given twice. Lena heard the small voice from behind her. "Mom, what's it going to be like there? Did you look up if they have ice cream shops or a playground? Or," the girl hesitated, "will I make friends?" Lena swallowed. She wanted to say yes, of course you will, easily, naturally, because you're bright and kind and warm. But the words felt like lies before she even let them form. She didn't know the town. She didn't know the people. She didn't know if her own nerves would sabotage everything or if her daughter would be the one to carry the weight of their transition. So she simply said, "We'll find out," keeping her voice even, careful, neutral. Silence settled in for a while, broken only by the steady rhythm of tires on pavement. The scenery shifted again. Fields gave way to clusters of houses, older ones that stood slightly crooked, each with yards that hinted at lives long established. Mailboxes leaned as if tired from years of service. Lawns were trimmed unevenly, some meticulously, others not at all. It was a far cry from the crowded apartment blocks and rows of convenience stores they had left behind. Kira perked up suddenly, leaning so far to the side that her seatbelt tugged tight. "Mom, look at that house. It's round." Lena's eyes flicked toward the right side of the road for just a second, long enough to catch a glimpse of something unusual. There, tucked away behind a scraggly outline of bushes, stood a house that didn't belong among the rectangular silhouettes of the neighborhood. Its walls curved in a perfect circle, and the roof sloped evenly like the top half of some vast drum. It wasn't whimsical exactly. It wasn't brightly colored or decorated. It was simple, weathered, and oddly dignified. But it was round. No corners, no edges. A soft building, if buildings could be soft. Kira pressed her hands to the window, breath fogging the glass. "Mom, did you see it? It looks like a cookie. Or a giant hat. Can we go inside? Can we see it?" Lena forced a small smile, her exhaustion tugging at her lips before the smile could truly form. "I saw it," she said. "Maybe we can walk around later when we're settled." Schachter, but even as she said the words, something inside her shifted an inexplicable tug, like the faint feeling of déjà vu when you see a place for the first time, and yet something about it echoes somewhere in your memory. She shook it off. She was tired, that was all. Too tired to analyze passing architecture. They arrived at the small rental house that would be theirs for the foreseeable future. 1 level, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, beige carpet stiff with wear. It wasn't a place to dream about, but it wasn't a place to fear either. Lena carried boxes inside while Kira wandered the rooms, narrating her exploration as though hosting a travel show. "This one could be my room," she declared. "And here's where we can put my books. And maybe we can paint the walls? Mom?" "We'll see," Lena replied, her mind preoccupied with the sink that dripped steadily, the window that stuck halfway up, the cabinet door that hung at a slight angle like a crooked smile. Everything required attention, and she felt her patience thinning with each detail. She snapped once, just once, when Kira reached for a box marked fragile. "Just leave that, Kira, please." The girl's startled expression pierced her immediately. Lena muttered an apology, but guilt clung stubbornly to the edges of her voice. That night, after they'd eaten sandwiches on the floor and unpacked the essentials, Kira curled up under her blanket and said, "Mom, can we go see the roundhouse tomorrow?" Lena hesitated before answering. She wanted to say no, because there were far more important things to do: unpack, find work leads, call the utility company about the flickering lights. But then she looked at her daughter's hopeful face and felt something in her soften. "Maybe," she said, "if we have time." In truth, she didn't expect Kira to remember in the morning. But children had a way of holding on to the small promises adults made without thinking, and when dawn came, Kira was already awake, brushing her hair with determination. "Let's go for a walk," she urged. "The roundhouse, remember?" So they went. The neighborhood was quiet, the air cool and pleasant as they made their way past modest homes with porches and wind chimes that tinkled faintly in the breeze. The sounds were unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting after the constant hum of city life. Lena noticed things she'd missed the day before: the way the sunlight filtered through thin tree branches, the small chalk drawings on a driveway, a porch swing gently swaying though no one sat in it. It made her feel like an outsider peering into a world already full. Kira skipped ahead, pausing occasionally to tug at Lena's hand and point at something trivial but charming: a garden gnome, a mailbox shaped like a barn, a dog behind a fence who wagged its tail so hard its entire body wiggled. Lena tried to absorb the simplicity of it all, tried to imagine herself fitting into this quiet place. The attempt felt clumsy, like trying on clothes that didn't quite suit her yet. They turned onto the road where the roundhouse stood. Up close, it was even stranger than Lena remembered. Its walls were smooth, uninterrupted by angles, and the aged wooden door looked slightly uneven, as though gravity had pulled on it for decades. The windows were small and round themselves, giving the structure an almost nautical feel, like the hull of a ship half buried in the earth. Kira circled the house immediately, running her hand along the wall, giggling at the odd sensation of following a curve instead of a straight line. "It's like it hugs you," she said. "Houses don't do that." Lena approached slowly, uncertain whether they were trespassing. There were no signs, no cars in the driveway, no signs of life at all. The yard was neither well kept nor overgrown, just a place left alone for a long time. She tested the doorknob, more out of curiosity than intention, and felt it shift under her hand. The door wasn't locked. She hesitated, glancing around, but the quiet of the street offered no judgment. Perhaps the house was abandoned. Perhaps it belonged to the city or a historical society. Perhaps in this small town, no one cared if strangers stepped inside an empty building. Kira stood by the door, eyes wide. "Can we? Please?" Lena exhaled slowly, the decision pressing against her in an unexpected way. She had broken no rules yet, but stepping inside felt like crossing a boundary of some kind. But then she saw Kira's anticipation, heard the bubbling excitement beneath her voice, and Lena felt a rare flicker of warmth. She nodded. The door opened with a long, deliberate groan. Inside, the air was still and cool, touched with the scent of old paper and dust. Sunlight filtered through the small round windows, casting curved beams across the floor. The room was one large circle, almost like an amphitheater stripped of its seats. Along the walls, stacked in uneven rows and clusters, were cardboard boxes, dozens of them, perhaps more. Some were labeled in faded marker, their edges softened with age. Kira stepped in first, her footsteps careful at first, then fearless. "Wow," she whispered. "It's like a treasure room." Lena followed more cautiously. Her eyes traveled across the room, taking in the boxes, the wooden beams overhead, the way the space felt oddly sheltered despite its emptiness. There was no furniture except for a few wooden stools and a small table near the far wall. Dust motes drifted lazily in the shafts of sunlight, dancing as Kira moved. The boxes drew her attention immediately. Each one seemed a whisper of stories waiting to be uncovered. Names, dates, and single words were written on some of them. Others were blank, their contents left to imagination. Kira reached for a box near her height, looking to Lena for permission, her fingers hovering over the lid. Lena hesitated again, the same internal conflict rising. This space belonged to someone once. These boxes were not theirs to open. But then she looked around. The house felt untouched for years, maybe decades. Whoever owned it had left it frozen in time, and curiosity began to outweigh caution. "Be gentle," Lena said softly. "Let's not break anything." Kira nodded solemnly, though excitement danced in her features. She lifted the lid for the first box, and inside were stacks of yellowed envelopes tied neatly with string. Lena felt something shift inside her, a subtle but undeniable pull, as though the house had been waiting for them. She pushed the feeling aside quickly, refusing to indulge in any sense of destiny or fate. She was tired. She had been through too much. That was all. Still, she stepped closer to the box, drawn in. And although she didn't know it yet, this moment, this dusty room, this quiet circular space, this simple action of opening a forgotten box would begin to unravel everything she thought she knew about her past, her mother and herself. The roundhouse stood silent around them, holding its breath. The air inside the roundhouse felt strangely alive, as if every dust mote drifting lazily in the light carried a memory. Lena remained still for a moment after Kira opened the first box, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness and the swirl of quiet that seemed to settle around them. The room felt untouched for so long that stepping inside was almost like stepping into a museum one, without plaques or ropes or attendants, but with an unspoken request for respect. Lena felt that request in the back of her mind, subtle but insistent. It made her move slowly, made her aware of every sound, the faint shift of the floorboards beneath her feet, Kira's small breaths, the rustle of old paper. The box they had chosen first was filled with letters, neatly bundled. There must have been hundreds of envelopes aged to the color of old ivory, tied with delicate strings that looked like they could break at the slightest tug. Kira looked up, waiting for guidance, and Lena gently pulled one bundle toward her. The string resisted for a second, then loosened with a tiny snap. A soft cloud of dust rose, shimmering in the sunlight. The letter on top was dated 1944. The handwriting was careful, slanted, the kind of script people used when they believed their words mattered. Lena unfolded it, smoothing the creases delicately. "Dear Annie," it began, "I'm writing again sooner than promised because last night I had a dream of home, and I didn't want to let it fade before sharing it with you." The rest unfolded with unexpected tenderness. The writer described the dream. Walking through a field behind a small house, hearing laughter, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in the cold emptiness of the barracks. He talked about the house he wanted to build when he returned circular, without corners, a house where nothing sharp could hide and where shadows couldn't cling to angles. He wrote about love in a way that startled Lena with its sincerity. There was no mention of bloodshed or fear, only yearning and hope. When she lowered the letter, she found Kira watching her intently, her eyes curious. "What does it say?" "It's a love letter," Lena answered softly, "from someone far away, someone who was dreaming of coming home." "Did he come home?" Kira asked. Lena hesitated. There was no way to know yet. She folded the letter back along its creases and placed it carefully aside. "Maybe," she said. "We'll have to read more to know." Kira nodded, satisfied with the idea of a mystery rather than an answer. They moved to the next box. This one held notebooks bound in cloth, their edges frayed with time. When Lena lifted the first, she felt the weight of it, literal and symbolic. It was a diary. The first page held a name written in elegant cursive, Margaret Lane, 1952. Below the name was a sentence. A new year, a new town, a new chance. Lena traced the writing with her finger, then flipped to the next page. The entries painted vivid snapshots of a woman who had arrived in this very town decades earlier, hopeful and terrified. Margaret described long days working at a general store, saving every penny she could, dreaming of stability. She wrote about the townspeople, cataloging their quirks and kindnesses. She mentioned the round house, calling it the strangest place I've ever seen, as if someone pulled it from a dream and forgot to finish the rest. As she read, Lena felt a peculiar connection forming. Margaret sounded like someone who had carried heavy burdens quietly, Someone who persevered not because she felt strong, but because she had no choice. Lena recognized the tone, the resilience wrapped in fatigue. It was familiar enough to sting. Kira wandered to another box, tugging at lids until one opened easily. She gasped in delight. "Mom, come see!" Inside were stacks of photographs, black and white prints, some faded to sepia, others surprisingly crisp. Kira picked one up carefully, holding it by the edges as Lena had shown her. The picture showed a group of school children standing in front of a building that no longer existed, their faces beaming in the sun. Another showed a parade marching down the main street of the town, with banners fluttering and a brass band in full uniform. Lena knelt beside her daughter, lifting photo after photo. They revealed families posing stiffly for portraits, couples laughing mid-motion, friends standing arm in arm. Some were mundane moments, a boy fishing by a creek, two girls sitting on a porch step shelling peas, a man fixing a tire with grease on his cheek. Others were clearly meant to capture milestones, graduations, weddings, reunions. But all of them shared an unmistakable intimacy, as though the photographer knew each subject deeply. "These are people who lived here, aren't they?" Kira asked, her voice softening. "Yes," Lena replied. "People who had whole lives, long before we ever got here." Kira touched one of the photos, a picture of a young woman holding a newborn. "Do you think the baby grew up and lived here too?" "Probably," Lena said, feeling a strange warmth at the thought. "Maybe they're still around." The sunlight shifted, casting longer beams across the room, and Lena realized they had been in the house far longer than she intended. Yet she didn't feel rushed. Instead, she felt grounded, more than she had in weeks. It was odd, given that the space was filled with strangers' memories, but somehow the stories felt comforting. They weren't dramatic or extraordinary. They were real, human, messy, imperfect, full of small joys and quiet fears. She walked slowly along the curved wall, noticing now that the boxes were organized in a particular order. The earliest items, letters from the 1930s and 40s, sat near the door. As she moved clockwise around the room, the years advanced. Diaries from the 50s and 60s, photographs from the 70s and 80s, folders filled with newspaper clippings documenting local events from different decades. Someone had painstakingly arranged everything. This wasn't a random hoard. It was a deliberate archive. Lena felt a shiver, not of fear, but of recognition. She had always been drawn to stories, to understanding how people lived and loved and made their choices. Maybe that was why she found it difficult to let go of her own past, even when she desperately wanted to. Standing in the round house, surrounded by the weight of so many lives, she felt something she hadn't expected: belonging. She found a box filled with maps, hand-drawn sketches of the town as it had evolved. Streets that no longer existed were marked with an X. Buildings that looked different now were labeled with their earlier purposes. One map, yellowed at the edges, had the roundhouse circled. There was no note explaining why, just the circle, highlighted as if it mattered. Kira flitted from one box to another, her curiosity boundless. She chattered to herself, occasionally calling Lena over to see something amusing or beautiful. Lena watched her and felt a pang. She had been distracted, burdened, consumed by stress for so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like to enjoy simple moments with her daughter. Kira stopped suddenly and turned, her face bright. "Mom, this is fun, like a scavenger hunt. We don't know what we'll find next." Lena's breath caught for a second. "Yeah," she said softly, "it is fun." But beneath that small joy was an undercurrent she couldn't name. Something tugged at her, faint but persistent. It wasn't fear. It wasn't dread. It was more like a whisper in the back of her mind, telling her that she wasn't here by accident, that the house had waited for someone to return, someone who would understand the significance of what it held. She shook off the thought. She didn't believe in signs or fate or anything mystical. She believed in exhaustion, in coincidence, in the need to keep moving even when you felt like collapsing. Yet when she touched another diary, this one from the early 60s, she felt a familiar ache in her chest. The author wrote about loneliness, about feeling like an outsider, even in a small, tight-knit community. They wrote about wanting to find a place where they belonged, somewhere they didn't need to pretend. Lena closed the diary gently. She understood that sentiment too well. They stayed until the light from the windows shifted into the softer hues of late afternoon. Kira eventually sat on the floor, drawing circles in the dust with her finger, humming a melody she seemed to invent as she went along. Lena walked one last lap around the room, absorbing the atmosphere. She realized she didn't want to leave. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running. This room, full of other people's memories, gave her something she had been missing: perspective. These people had lived through wars, heartbreaks, moves, losses, new beginnings. They had kept going, just as she was trying to. When she finally called for Kira, the girl protested but obeyed. As they stepped outside, the door closing behind them, with another deep groan, Lena looked back at the round house with a strange certainty. They would return. She wasn't finished with the stories inside, and somewhere within the stacks of forgotten lives, she sensed something waiting for her specifically, though she could not yet imagine what. As they walked home in the fading light, Kira chattered about her favorite discoveries of the day, asking when they could go back, if they could bring snacks next time, if they could organize the boxes by year like a real museum. Lena smiled, listening with one ear, while her mind drifted back to the circle drawn on that old map, and the letters about a house without corners meant to keep shadows away. The next day, she told herself, they would go again. She had no idea just how much would change when they did. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the town itself were still deciding whether to accept its new residents. Pale light slipped through the thin curtains in the small rental house, painting soft lines across the ceiling. Lena woke before Kira, as she usually did. It wasn't that she set an alarm. Her thoughts simply refused to let her sleep more than a few restless hours at a time. She lay on her back for a while, staring at the faint cracks in the paint above her, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the neighborhood, the distant rumble of a truck, a dog barking once and then falling silent, the faint clatter of someone's trash can lid. Her mind went naturally back to the roundhouse. She saw again the stacks of cardboard boxes, the bundles of letters, the diaries, the photographs. They swirled together in her thoughts like fragments from other people's dreams. Underneath the curiosity and the strange sense of comfort she had felt there, something else churned, an unease she hadn't fully acknowledged the day before. It was as if the house had brushed lightly against a door in her memory, one she had long accepted as locked. She turned onto her side and saw Kira curled up on the other bed in the small room, hair spread across the pillow like a dark halo, mouth slightly open, one hand clutching the edge of the blanket. For a fleeting second, the sight softened everything in Lena's chest. Her daughter had adapted better than she had any right to, given the sudden move, the disruption to everything she knew. Kids were resilient, people always said. Sometimes Lena worried they were resilient in ways adults didn't deserve. Kira stirred then, as though feeling her mother's gaze, and her eyes blinked open. She focused gradually, the room returning to her in pieces. "Morning," she mumbled, rubbing at one eye. "Morning," Lena said. "How did you sleep?" "Good." Kira yawned, then suddenly seemed to remember something important. She sat up a little too fast. "Are we going back today?" Lena didn't have to ask where. "To the roundhouse?" she said anyway. Kira nodded so vigorously that her hair bounced. "There are still so many boxes we didn't open, and we didn't finish looking at the pictures, and that map on the wall. Did you see the one with the little circle? I think it was this town. What if there's more about it?" Her words tumbled over one another in their eagerness, and Lena felt her resistance. What little remained dissolve. She had errands she should run, phone calls she should make, a practical checklist she ought to be working through to secure their new life. But none of those tasks felt as urgent as the inexplicable pull she felt toward that circular room full of stories. One more day wouldn't destroy their chances at stability, and maybe she thought she needed this as much as Kira did. "We can go after breakfast," she said. They ate cereal at the small kitchen table, the cheap chairs wobbling slightly underneath them. Kira talked about which boxes she wanted to look at first, how they should organize the place, as if they had been somehow hired as unofficial curators. Lena listened with half a smile, though her thoughts wandered. She tried unsuccessfully to remember if her mother had ever mentioned growing up in a small town like this. She remembered vague references to a different place, before I moved, when I was younger, but nothing specific, nothing that anchored those stories to geography. Her mother had always been careful that way, detail averse when it came to her own past, as if she feared facts might betray her. When they stepped back outside, the air was warmer than the day before, touched with the faint scent of cut grass. The sky stretched wide and clear, the kind of unbroken blue that made Lena feel both small and oddly exposed. She locked the front door, a habit ingrained by years in the city, and they set off toward the roundhouse. The route was already familiar. They passed the same houses with their porches and flower beds, the same mailbox leaning like an old man resting on a cane, the same dog that barked twice and then wagged its tail as they went by. This time Lena walked with a bit more purpose, less like a tourist and more like someone returning to a place she already knew she wanted to revisit. Kira, by contrast, practically danced along the sidewalk, occasionally spinning, occasionally skipping, occasionally stopping short to point at something that had caught her eye. "Do you think the house misses the people who used to come there?" Kira asked suddenly, glancing up at her mother. Lena considered the question. "I don't know," she said. "It's just a building. But don't you feel like it's not empty?" Kira persisted. "It's full of things, and I don't know. It feels like it's waiting." Lena shot her a sideways look, a flicker of surprise passing through her. The words echoed her own half-formed thoughts a little too closely. "Maybe it's waiting for someone to care about what's inside," she suggested carefully. "Places can feel different when they're loved." "Then we're doing a good job," Kira said, sounding satisfied. When they reached the round house, it looked exactly as it had the day before. Silent, slightly weathered, stubbornly self-contained among the squared-off houses surrounding it. The bushes still brushed the outer walls in untidy clusters, and the path leading to the front door was faint, more an accumulation of chance footsteps than a deliberate walkway. The door opened just as heavily, with the same drawn-out groan that now sounded less ominous and more like the creak of an old friend stretching stiff limbs. Inside, the air was cool again, carrying the same layered scent of dust, paper, and time. Sunlight spilled in from the round windows, carving curved shapes on the floor. Nothing had changed, and yet Lena felt different entering the space this time. Less like an intruder, more like a visitor with a purpose. "All right," she said as Kira started forward. "Remember what we talked about. Be careful. We're here to look, not to mess anything up. And we keep everything where we found it, okay?" "Okay," Kira answered. "I'll just find the best treasures." "That's what I'm afraid of," Lena murmured, though there was a trace of affection in her voice she hadn't heard in herself for a while. They seemed to fall into unspoken roles almost immediately. Lena gravitated toward the boxes with writing on the outside, dates, names, labels that suggested some kind of order. She felt drawn to the diaries and letters, perhaps because words were what anchored her most. Kira, on the other hand, was pulled toward photographs, small objects, anything that caught the light or looked even remotely unusual. She was the scout, darting from one corner to another, calling out when she discovered something she thought her mother had to see. At first, they continued where they had left off. Lena opened another collection of letters, these from the late 40s. The handwriting was different, the lives chronicled in them distinct, but the emotional threads were often similar: longing, fear, hope, joy in small details. It struck her how universal those feelings were, how little they changed from decade to decade. It gave her a strange comfort to think that her own worries might also be, in some distant future, nothing more than one woman's small struggle among countless others. As she read, her mind kept trying to wander to practical matters: her bare checking account, the job search she had barely begun, the school registration process for Kira. She forced herself to push those thoughts aside for the moment. There would be time for panic later. Right now, she wanted to be here fully, in this space that didn't ask anything of her except attention. "Mom!" Kira's voice came from somewhere to her left, more excited than before. "Come look at this one. It's weird." "Is it weird good or weird bad?" Lena asked, still half concentrating on the letter in her hands. "Weird, weird," Kira declared. But not gross. That's a relief, Lena said, placing the letter carefully back into its envelope and setting the bundle on top of the box. All right, I'm coming. She dusted off her jeans as she stood and followed the sound of her daughter's small feet and anxious hands to the far edge of the room, where the boxes had been stacked 2 and 3 high. The light was dimmer here, the nearest window partly shadowed by the branches outside. Kira was crouched in front of a corner stack, her fingers hooking under the side of a box to pull it free. This one was way in the back, she said, dragging it into a more open patch of floor. It was almost hidden. Lena's gaze fell to the top of the box. The cardboard was the same nondescript brown as the others, the edges slightly frayed, the surface dust-coated. But in the center of the lid, written in faded but still legible marker, there were words. It took her a second to register them. Her brain read the letters out of habit before attaching meaning. Then the meaning hit. The surname written there was her own, not her married name, not the one on her driver's license or the paperwork she had just submitted for the rental. It was the name she had grown up with, the one that linked her to her mother, the name she had set aside when she married and never fully reclaimed, even after everything fell apart. Petrova. Above it was an initial. G below it, 2 dates, 1979, 1993. For a moment, the room went very still. Sound didn't disappear exactly. It just faded so far into the background that it felt as though it no longer belonged to her. Lena heard the distant thump of her own heartbeat more clearly than the soft rustling of leaves outside or the tiny shifting movements of the house settling on its foundation. Her fingers went cold. The air, a second ago comfortably cool, now seemed thin and fragile in her lungs. "Mom?" Kira's voice broke through the sudden quiet. "Why are you looking at it like that?" Lena realized her hand had come up to her mouth, pressing against her lips. She forced it down. Do you see the name?" she asked, her own voice sounding foreign to her ears. Kira peered at the lid again, squinting a little. "It looks like your name," she said. "Your old one. The one on your school trophies, Petrova. Did you put it there?" "No," Lena whispered. "No, I didn't." G. Petrova, 1979, 1993. Her mother's first name was Galina. That initial could have been anyone's, she told herself. There were plenty of surnames that existed in more than one place. But the dates. 1979 was the year her mother would have been about 12, if Lena remembered correctly. 1993 was just a few years before Lena had been born. Her stomach tightened. Her mind scrambled for explanation and found none that came without a chill. She stared at the box, almost expecting the letters to shift into something more benign if she just looked long enough. But they remained what they were, simple marks on old cardboard, stating something that seemed impossible. Kira's brow furrowed. "Is it about Grandma?" I don't know yet," Lena said. Her throat felt dry. "Maybe. It might be." "Did Grandma live here?" Kira asked. "You never said she did." "I didn't know she did," Lena replied, and the honesty of that admission shook her more than she anticipated. She sank slowly to the floor, her knees folding beneath her, until she was sitting across from the box, its lid somehow heavier now that she knew what was written on it. Kira, sensing something in her mother's demeanor that made her cautious, sat down too, though a little further back. "You look like you're going to cry," she observed, her voice small but steady. "I'm not going to cry," Lena said automatically. She didn't sound convinced, even to herself. She reached forward, intending to brush off some of the dust from the lid. Her fingers trembled slightly as they made contact with the rough surface. The dust smeared under her touch, revealing the writing more clearly. Yes, there was no mistake. The letters were faded but firm. G. Petrova, 1979, 1993. It shouldn't have meant anything more than coincidence. But Lena knew in a place beyond logic that it did. She sat like that for a few moments, her mind flickering back through every conversation she'd had with her mother about the past. They were few and scattered, mostly vague glimpses. Her mother had never been talkative, especially not about her own childhood. When Lena pressed, she received answers like, "It was a long time ago," or "It doesn't matter now," or the infuriatingly final, "Some things are best left alone"? She had grown up learning not to ask too many questions, and yet here she was, in a small town she'd chosen almost at random, sitting in an abandoned round house full of other people's histories, with a box in front of her labeled with her mother's name and the span of years her mother refused to talk about. It was like tripping over a buried root in a forest that suddenly revealed itself as part of a much larger tree. "Are you going to open it?" Kira's question came softly, as though she were afraid of disturbing something sacred. Lena swallowed. Her instinct was to say no, to push the box back into the corner, to let it be. But another instinct, stronger, fiercer, born of years of unanswered questions and quiet resentments, rose in her chest. She had spent so long feeling like there were parts of herself she could never understand, because half her story had been hidden from her. Perhaps this box held one small piece of that puzzle. "Yes," she said. The words sounded steady enough, even though her insides were anything but. "Yes, I'm going to open it." She slipped her fingernails under one edge of the lid. It resisted at first, the cardboard stuck a bit where dust and time had pressed it together. Then with a dry little crackle, it came loose. She lifted the lid carefully, almost reverently, and set it aside. Inside, the box was filled almost to the top. The contents had settled over time into a compact, layered arrangement. On top were school notebooks, their covers decorated with doodles and ink stains. The pages inside were filled with handwritten notes, homework assignments, fragments of poetry, bits of hurried mathematics. The handwriting, though younger and less disciplined, had a familiar slant. Lena felt a pang in her chest seeing it. Her mother's handwriting on shopping lists and birthday cards had been sharper, more practiced. But this was the same hand in a different time, a softer version of itself. She picked up one notebook and flipped through. Names of American authors, vocabulary lists, grammar exercises, a clumsy drawing of a tree in the margin, a sentence circled twice. "I want to live somewhere I can start over." She set it down, then lifted a stack of loose papers beneath it. Some were letters, never sent, addressed to friends whose names Lena didn't recognize. Others were fragments of journal entries, torn from a larger notebook. A few lines caught her eye. "Sometimes I feel like our house is made of glass and everyone outside can see all our cracks. I don't know if I belong here or if I'm just waiting for the right time to leave. The round house at the edge of town looks so strange from the road. I heard someone say a man wanted to build it to keep bad memories from gathering in corners. I wonder if that works." Lena's breath caught. Her mother had known this house, not as a rumor, not as a distant curiosity, but closely enough to write about it. The world inside Lena shifted again, like plates grinding beneath the earth's surface. "Are those hers?" Kira asked, leaning forward slightly. "Grandma's, I mean." "Yes," Lena said quietly. "These were your grandma's things, from when she was about your age and a little older." "She was a kid here?" There was awe, almost delight, in Kira's tone, as if the idea of her grandmother as anything other than an already grown adult opened some hidden door in her imagination. "It looks like she was," Lena said. "She never told me that." Kira pondered that for a moment, her brow furrowing. "Why wouldn't she tell you?" she asked. "It seems like an important thing." "I don't know," Lena replied, and there was more hurt in that truth than she expected. Maybe it was hard for her to talk about. She dug further into the box. Beneath the notebooks and loose papers were small objects. A plastic bracelet with a missing clasp, a hair ribbon, a crumpled ticket stub from a county fair, a folded paper program from a school play. Each item hummed with the ghost of a moment, an afternoon spent with friends, a night under string lights, a performance in front of nervous parents. Lena tried to picture her mother in those scenes, younger, freer, long before Lena herself existed. It was difficult. Her mother had always seemed fully formed, like a statue rather than a person who had once been soft and unshaped. She found a school photo, rows of students in matching outfits, their expressions ranging from solemn to goofy. One girl in the second row, with dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and eyes that seemed to gaze a fraction more intensely than the others, looked familiar in a way that made Lena's chest ache. She studied the face and saw the woman she had known, Older, more guarded, hidden in the younger features. It was definitely her mother. "That's Grandma," Kira said, leaning close enough that her shoulder brushed Lena's arm. "She looks like you." "She looks like both of us," Lena murmured, noticing for the first time the way the shape of the jaw, the slope of the nose, echoed down the generations. They kept going. There were letters from a girl named Beth, written in looping, enthusiastic script. They spoke of sleepovers and crushes and homework, of wanting to get out of the town someday, of promises to stay in touch forever. One letter near the bottom of the stack had a different tone. The handwriting was still bubbly, but the words felt heavier. "You just disappeared, G. You said you would call, and then nothing. I went by your house, and your mom said you were gone, and that was it. How can you be gone without saying goodbye? If something happened, I wish you would at least let me know you're okay. This place feels different without you, smaller. I still go by the roundhouse sometimes and think about us sitting on the fence and making up stories about who might move in. I hope you're somewhere better. I hope you're happy, but I wish you'd written one more letter." Lena read those lines twice, then a third time. The words blurred slightly at the edges. Gone. That was how her mother had left this place. Not with a fond farewell, not with an open door, just one day there, and the next day not. It fit, in a twisted way, with the woman Lena had known. Someone who could close entire chapters of her life and never turn back, even if it meant severing ties completely. "Did Grandma run away?" Kira asked, voicing the thought that had formed in Lena's mind with unnerving accuracy. "I don't know," Lena said slowly. "Maybe her family moved. Maybe she left suddenly for some reason. The letter doesn't say." "Why didn't she tell you?" Kira persisted. "About this place? About this friend?" "Because she didn't want me to know," Lena thought. "Because if she told me, she would have to admit that there were parts of her life she didn't control, that there were things she regretted, because she was more comfortable with silence than with vulnerability. But she didn't say any of that aloud." Kira didn't need those layers yet. Instead, she answered, "Sometimes grown-ups have things they don't know how to talk about. It doesn't mean they didn't care. It just means they were afraid, maybe, or ashamed, or they didn't have the words." "Do you have things like that?" Kira asked. Lena almost laughed at the directness of the question. "Yes," she said honestly. "I do." Kira considered that, then nodded. "I guess I probably will too when I'm big." "Maybe," Lena replied. "I hope you'll tell me more than my mom told me, though." "I will," Kira said solemnly. "I'm going to tell you everything, even if it's embarrassing." Despite the heaviness in her chest, Lena smiled. "I'll hold you to that." She dug deeper into the box. Toward the bottom, beneath a final layer of school papers and dog-eared paperback books, she found a small bundle of photographs wrapped in tissue paper. The tissue crackled softly when she unfolded it. Inside were just a handful of photographs, but they seemed more carefully chosen, more personal than the others. The first was of two teenage girls sitting on a wooden fence. One was her mother, unmistakable even in youth. The other likely the Beth from the letters hairlighter, smile broader, arm flung casually around her friend's shoulders. Behind them, blurred slightly, was the round shape of the house. The angle was different, the surrounding trees smaller, but the structure was the same, recognizable in its stubborn circularity. Lena stared at the image. Here it was, proof that her mother hadn't just known of the house. She had spent time near it, laughed in its shadow, posed in front of it. This place had been a backdrop to her mother's adolescence, and yet she had never mentioned it to her daughter. Not once. "Wow," Kira whispered. "It looks almost the same, except the trees were smaller, and Grandma's hair is long." Lena swallowed hard. "Yeah," she said. "It looks almost exactly the same." She flipped to the next photo. This one showed her mother alone, sitting on the steps of the round house. Her posture was relaxed, one knee drawn up, her arms loosely resting on it. She was looking slightly away from the camera, not quite smiling, but with a softness in her eyes that made Lena's heart ache. There was a vulnerability there that Lena had never seen on her mother's adult face, a kind of openness that life had gradually replaced with a guarded distance. She lifted the photograph closer, as if proximity could reveal some hidden clue. The worn wood of the steps, the curve of the doorway behind her mother, the faint pattern of chipped paint on the door. Lena recognized them. She had walked past those steps now, 2 days in a row. She could go outside at this very moment and stand in that same spot. The thought made her dizzy. That's the same door, Kira said. The exact same door. She sat right here where we are. Not quite where we are, Lena replied, her voice strained, but close. Why didn't you ever come here with her? Kira asked. Because I didn't know this place existed, Lena said. I didn't even know what town she grew up in. She never told me. But you're here now, Kira said. There was no accusation in her tone, just simple observation. Yes, Lena whispered. I'm here now. The enormity of it pressed down on her. All those years of her life, built on incomplete truths, on stories with missing pages, and somehow, through a series of decisions and accidents and desperate choices, she had ended up in the very town her mother had once called home. In front of the very house her mother had posed on, thinking perhaps that those days would stay locked in that moment forever. It made the coincidence seem almost absurd. Unless it wasn't coincidence, a small, treacherous voice in her mind suggested. She pushed the thought away, too mystical, too ungrounded. She refused to believe the universe had orchestrated her financial stress and emotional collapse just to lead her here. She clung to practicality like a life raft. It didn't matter how she had arrived. What mattered was that she was here now. Box open, past exposed. She set the photograph down gently and sifted through the remaining contents. A folded schedule from the local high school. A ribbon that might have been from a track meet or a debate competition. A small, worn paperback with notes scribbled in the margins. Each item was a breadcrumb leading through the forest of her mother's adolescence. A forest her mother had never invited her to walk through. The more she saw, the more questions swelled in her. Why had her mother left so suddenly? Why had she never written back to Beth? Why had she never spoken of this house, this town, these years? What had happened here that made silence seem safer than acknowledgement? Those questions pressed against her ribs like something physically wedged there, making it harder to breathe. She felt Kira's eyes on her, watching her closely, and she forced herself to inhale slowly, to steady her hands. Mom, Kira said quietly, are you mad at Grandma? Lena paused. The question was unexpected but fair. She searched herself for the answer. Anger was certainly there, small, sharp, like a shard of glass she'd accidentally stepped on and never fully removed. But there was also confusion and a strange, reluctant sympathy. She knew firsthand how life could push a person into choices they wouldn't have imagined making. She knew how shame could glue your tongue to the roof of your mouth. I don't know if mad is the right word, she said eventually. I'm hurt and confused. I don't understand why she didn't think I could know this part of her, but I also think maybe she had her reasons, even if I don't agree with them. Are you glad we found this? Kira asked. Yes, Lena said. The word came easily this time. I'm glad, even if it hurts a little. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the faint crinkle of paper as Lena shifted items inside the box and the distant chirping of birds outside. The round house felt less like an abstract archive now, and more like a room that held a very specific story she was directly connected to. The weight of that realization settled on her shoulders, but it was a weight she decided she wanted to carry. She had grown up accepting that some doors would always remain closed. Her mother had built her life around those locked doors, guarding them fiercely. Lena had tried for years not to resent that, telling herself that everyone had a right to privacy, that the past was the past. But now sitting here, presented with a box her mother had clearly not expected her to ever open, she felt something else rising in her, a quiet, steady resolve. She was tired of living inside someone else's silence. She reached toward the back corner of the box, where a few remaining items were nestled. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and rectangular, a stiff piece of paper, smaller than the notebooks and papers stacked above it. She curled her hand around it and drew it out. It was an envelope. Unlike the others she had seen, this one had no postage stamp, no address, no postmark. It was not yellowed with travel or worn from handling. It looked as though it had been written and placed directly into the box waiting, The paper was cream-colored, the flap tucked in but not sealed. On the front, in the same familiar handwriting, was a single word, written clearly in ink that had faded only slightly with time. Lena. Her name. Not the full, formal version on official documents. Not a nickname twisted by affection or exasperation. Just her name. Exactly the way her mother had said it when she was angry, or worried, or unexpectedly proud. Seeing it written there, in that hand, on a paper that had clearly existed before Lena herself had even come into the world, it made something inside her twist. She stared at the envelope, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. It felt like every sound in the room dimmed, as if the house were once again holding its breath along with her. Her fingers tightened around the edges, but she didn't open it. Not yet. She couldn't. The idea of what might be inside was suddenly too large to face in an instant. Kira leaned closer, eyes wide. "It has your name," she whispered, as though speaking too loudly might break something fragile. "Did Grandma write that for you?" "I think she did," Lena said. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "But how? Didn't she write this before you were even born?" Kira's face was creased with puzzlement. "Maybe she wrote it later," Lena said slowly. "Maybe she came back to the box at some point, or maybe someone else put it here for her. I don't know." She realized, not for the first time, how much she truly didn't know. "Are you going to read it?" Kira asked. "Yes," Lena said, though she made no move to open it. Her heart was beating too hard, too fast. Just not this second. She slipped the envelope between her fingers carefully, afraid it might disintegrate if she squeezed too tightly. Her mind was spinning, not just with curiosity, but with a strange dread. Whatever was written inside could change everything, or it could change nothing. It could be an apology, or an explanation, or a confession, or something so simple it would feel anticlimactic. The not knowing was almost unbearable. "We should probably take a break," she said, more to herself than to Kira. "We've been here a long time." "But we just found," Kira began, then looked at her mother's face and stopped. "Okay, we can come back, but don't lose that letter. Promise?" "I won't," Lena said. She held the envelope like it was something precious and volatile all at once. As she replaced the notebooks and papers back into the box, trying to leave everything as close to its original arrangement as she could, she felt that same sense of purpose she'd begun to glimpse the day before crystallize into something more solid. The stories in this house were no longer just curiosities. They were threads leading backward into a past that had shaped her life without her consent or awareness. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could, at last, look it in the eye. She closed the box gently, leaving the lid askew rather than sealing it completely, as if acknowledging that nothing inside it could be packed away as neatly as before. The envelope remained in her hand. When they stepped outside, the light felt brighter, almost harsh after the cool dimness of the house. The sky seemed too open, the air too thin. Lena squinted, letting her eyes adjust. She slipped the envelope into the safest place she could think of in that moment, the inside pocket of her jacket, where it rested close to her chest. Kira walked beside her in uncharacteristic silence for several minutes, glancing up occasionally at her mother's face. Finally, she said, "You're different." Lena glanced down. "What do you mean?" "You look like when you're thinking hard, but also like you might be sad." Kira's fingers reached out to gently hook into the crook of her mother's elbow, the way she had done when she was younger, and they crossed busy streets together. "It's a lot," Lena admitted. "Finding out that Grandma had a whole part of her life she never told me about, that she lived here, that she knew that house, that she left all those things behind. It makes me feel, I don't know, like I've been reading a book with missing chapters." "Maybe now you get to read them," Kira said, "even if the person who wrote them didn't want to show you at first." "Maybe," Lena said softly. She knew, even as they walked back through the quiet streets toward their temporary home, that she would go back to the roundhouse again. She would dig deeper, ask questions, try to find people in town who remembered the girl in those photographs and letters. She would because the alternative, continuing to live inside someone else's silence, no longer felt bearable. But before she did any of that, She knew she had to face the envelope now resting against her heart, the one with her name in her mother's handwriting, the one that might finally open a door she'd been pressing her ear against her entire life. Behind them, the round house stood as it had for decades, its curved walls quietly holding its cargo of stories. Inside, one box lay slightly ajar where Lena had left it. For the first time in years, the name on its lid had been read aloud by the person for whom it mattered most. And nestled inside Lena's jacket, a letter waited, patient and unmoving, its contents sealed not by glue but by time and fear and unspoken history, until she found the courage to unfold it. The walk back home felt longer than usual, as if each step required Lena to push through a thicker, heavier air. The letter in her jacket pocket pressed against her like a small, silent heartbeat that wasn't her own. Every time she took a breath, she felt its presence, thin paper, delicate, yet heavy with meaning she couldn't yet bear to face. She kept her hand in her pocket, fingers brushing the envelope occasionally as if to confirm it was still there, and not some strange hallucination brought on by stress or exhaustion. Behind them, the round house remained out of sight, swallowed by trees in distance, but Lena felt it lingering in her thoughts with the same insistence as the letter. When she and Kira reached the small rental house, the neighborhood was quiet. The usual midday noises, lawnmowers, passing cars, kids playing, were strangely absent, as if the world had paused to give Lena space to think. Kira went inside first, kicking off her shoes in the hallway and heading toward the living room with the comfortable ease only children possessed. But Lena lingered a moment on the doorstep, staring out at the street as though expecting to see someone watching her. No one was there. Just a parked car, a bird hopping along a mailbox, and the faint rustle of wind moving through leaves. Still, she couldn't shake the sensation that something in her life had shifted irreversibly, like a door closing behind her, with no way to reopen it. She stepped inside, letting the screen door whisper shut behind her. Kira had begun pulling out crayons and paper, her brow furrowed in determination as she declared she was going to draw the round house, but better, with all the memories inside. Lena offered a small smile and reached down to brush a lock of hair from the girl's face. "That sounds beautiful," she said softly. "You can look at it when I'm done," Kira replied, already engrossed. Lena nodded, then walked into her bedroom, closing the door with a quiet click. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on her knees for a long moment before she dared to touch the envelope again. Her fingers curled around the thin paper, and she exhaled slowly, allowing herself permission to acknowledge just how afraid she was. For years, she had convinced herself that the gaps in her mother's stories didn't matter, that a parent not sharing everything wasn't unusual, that certain memories, certain chapters, simply faded away or were too painful to revisit. But now, with this envelope in front of her, those excuses felt flimsy. This letter written by her mother at some unknown point in time, placed in a box her mother had left behind, in a place she had never spoken of, held truths her mother had deliberately withheld. Lena didn't know whether opening it would soothe the wound or deepen it. She stared at the envelope for a long time before she finally slid her finger under the flap. She opened it carefully, slowly, as though peeling back the fragile skin of an injury. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper, the handwriting unmistakably her mother's. Small, neat strokes, each letter controlled with a precision that seemed both practiced and guarded. She unfolded it, her breath caught. "Lena, if you're reading this, you found something I hoped you never would. Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I didn't want the past to shape you the way it shaped me. This town holds too many ghosts mine, not yours. I left it without saying goodbye, and for years I told myself that silence was a form of self-protection. Maybe it was then, but I know it isn't anymore. If you've come here, then you're searching for something. I'm sorry I never gave you the answers while I was alive. If I could go back, I would try. You deserved more truth than I knew how to give. There are things you'll learn, things I cannot explain in one letter. Talk to the people who remember. They will tell you what I couldn't. But whatever you find, please don't let it make you doubt that I loved you. Even the silences were full of love, though I know now how little comfort that must be. Mama." The signature was in Russian, Lena stared at the looped letters, feeling them like a bruise beneath her name. Her mother rarely used Russian in writing. It was something she'd kept tucked away, like everything else from her childhood. Seeing the Cyrillic letters made Lena's throat tighten. They spoke not only of her mother's past, but of a part of her identity she had abandoned along the way. The letter wasn't long. It didn't offer explanations or specifics. Its brevity made it feel even more heartbreaking. Her mother had written something and yet held so much back. It was like being handed a key with no lock to match it, only the suggestion that there was a door somewhere waiting to be found. Lena lowered the letter to her lap and pressed her palms to her eyes. Tears came, not in a sudden rush, but in slow, steady drops that warmed her cheeks before falling silently. She didn't sob. She didn't choke. Her grief was quieter, a weariness that had lived inside her for so long she barely recognized it as sadness anymore. It felt like opening a window in a room she didn't realize had grown suffocating. "Mama," she whispered into the stillness, "why didn't you tell me?" There was no answer, of course, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Kira humming to herself in the other room. The world outside continued on, unaware of the small, seismic shift happening in one cramped bedroom. After a while, she wiped her face and folded the letter again, smoothing it with care. She returned it to the envelope, then placed it on the nightstand. It felt wrong to hide it away. This was not something to bury. It was something she needed to understand. She thought back to the letter Beth had written, the confusion and grief in her friend's words. She thought back to the photograph of her mother sitting on the steps of the roundhouse, looking like she belonged there in some inexplicable way. And she realized then that the place itself held pieces of her mother that no amount of silence could erase. She stood up, took a deep breath, and returned to the living room. Kira looked up, surprised to see the unevenness in her mother's expression. Children had a remarkable ability to notice the things adults tried to hide. "Did you read it?" Kira asked gently. "Yes," Lena said. "I did. What did it say?" Lena sat beside her daughter, gathering the words carefully. "It said that Grandma didn't want the past to hurt me, that she didn't tell me things because she was scared or ashamed. But she also said that if we came here, we should talk to the people who remember her." She paused. "She said she loved me." Kira nodded slowly, absorbing each word with the solemnity only a child trying to understand an adult's heartbreak could offer. Then she reached over and took her mother's hand. It was a small gesture, but it grounded Lena in a way nothing else could. "What happens now?" Kira asked. "We go back," Lena said. "We keep looking. We find out what she didn't tell me." It felt like making a promise, not just to herself, but to the girl in the school photographs, to the teenager sitting on the roundhouse steps, to the woman who had written Lena on an envelope and then hidden it away. That afternoon, Lena decided to walk to the small cafe she had noticed on their first day in town. She wasn't looking for food or coffee. She was looking for people, the kind who might have lived here long enough to remember names and faces that no longer appeared in yearbooks or local directories. She left Kira drawing at the table, promising to return soon. The cafe sat at the corner of the main street, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. When she entered, a bell over the door chimed, drawing the attention of the handful of customers scattered throughout the room. An older woman wearing a faded floral apron stood behind the counter, wiping down a tray. She looked up and smiled at Lena with a familiarity that startled her. "You must be the new tenant in the Martin house," the woman said. Lena blinked. "Yes, how did you know?" The woman chuckled softly. "Small town. We notice things. I'm Ruth." "Lena," she replied, offering her hand. "Looking for something? Menu's on the board, but I can tell you what people actually order." "Coffee would be great," Lena said, though she doubted she'd be able to drink much. As Ruth poured the cup, Lena gathered her courage. "Can I ask you something? Something strange?" Ruth raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Ask. Did you know anyone by the name Petrova?" Lena asked quietly. "G. Petrova, from a long time ago." Ruth froze, the coffee pot hovering midair. Her face changed not with shock, exactly, but with recognition and memory. Deep, buried memory. She set the pot down carefully. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I knew her." Not well, maybe, but well enough. Galina Petrova. She lived here for a few years. A quiet girl, kept to herself more than the others. Lena's breath hitched. A strange warmth and coldness mingled in her chest. Do you know why she left? Lena asked. Ruth's eyes softened, though her expression became guarded, as if she were weighing each word. People leave for all sorts of reasons, but Galina, she left fast, overnight almost. Her mother packed them up, and they were gone by morning. No explanations. Was something wrong? Lena asked. Ruth sighed, folding her hands on the counter. Nothing I can say for sure. People talked, as they always do. Some said her family was having a hard time. Others said Galina had trouble with some kids at school. And some said there was something else going on, something no one ever wanted to say out loud. But that's all gossip. I was too young to know the truth. What I do know is that she was a good girl, and she seemed sad, always on the edge of something she couldn't quite escape. Lena absorbed this silently. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever known. Do you know anything about the Roundhouse? Lena asked next. Ruth hesitated again, longer this time. That place? Yes, it's been there longer than anyone can remember. Built by a man who believed circles had special meaning. No corners, no shadows, no bad energy. People laugh about it now, but back then, folks thought he was a genius or a lunatic, depending on the day. After he died, the house became a kind of collection point. People brought old things there, memories, things they didn't want to throw away but didn't have space for. It became a place where the past gathered. That's exactly what it feels like, Lena murmured. Ruth gave her a searching look. Why are you asking all this? Lena hesitated. Then quietly she said, because Galina was my mother. The cafe seemed to grow quieter. Ruth's eyes widened, softened again, and a slow understanding settled over her features. Well then, she said, her voice gentle, I think you have a journey ahead of you. Lena nodded. I know. Ruth leaned closer. And you're brave to start it. When Lena returned home, the weight inside her had shifted. Not lighter, not heavier, but clearer. She found Kira asleep on the couch, curl of hair plastered to her cheek, colored pencils scattered around her latest drawing of the Roundhouse. The moment was so tender, it momentarily stole Lena's breath. She sat beside her daughter, brushing her hair back, feeling the warmth of her small body. The letter in her pocket felt less like a burden now, and more like a guide. The silence her mother left behind was still there, but it had cracks in it, now cracks that let light through. And for the first time since finding the box, Lena no longer felt lost. She felt determined. The past was no longer a locked door. It was a hallway she had just begun to step into. The Roundhouse waited, full of stories yet untold, full of truths that had shaped the life she inherited. And tomorrow she would return, not as a curious visitor, but as someone finally ready to listen. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to join me on the rest of the journey. There are many more videos waiting for you. Feel free to watch the next one or explore others on the channel. And if you think someone else might appreciate this story, please share it.